welcome to another Smaulgld Dark Side series. Today we'll talk about the dark side of minimum wage laws. The minimum wage laws waste technology resources. Now this is an angle you probably haven't heard before. We're going to discuss the misdirection of scarce technology resources and innovation when they are applied to combating minimum wage laws. Now, much has been written in favor and against minimum wage laws, and the traditional arguments are on the left, from the social justice warriors arguing for a living wage. They argue, like Nancy Pelosi, that when you give workers more money, they go out and spend it. There's arguments that it's the just and the right thing to do. Companies already make too much money, therefore it's only right and just that the money go to the workers. On the flip side, there's the free market school of thought that argues, well, then the employers are just going to fire the workers. They're not going to pay them the additional amount. Maybe some will get the additional amount, the amount that's mandated by law, but they just won't hire as many workers. Therefore, they argue that this harms entry-level job seekers because there's fewer entry-level jobs available because the employer doesn't deem the minimum wage being an amount that makes sense for them to pay. So this argument says that employment goes down. There's fewer opportunities for low-level employees or entry-level employees to get the job experience they need, and then basically the whole job market suffers as a result. That first rung on the job ladder has been pushed higher and out of reach for many new workers. But we're not going to focus on those arguments. Those you've heard before. The argument I'd like to make today is that against the minimum wage is that it creates a misallocation of technology and intellectual resources. As we mentioned, when the minimum wage goes up, employers can either raise prices, fire workers, or look to ways to lower the costs of the tasks that their employees conduct. So normally you have technology needs arise when, not technology needs, but technology innovations arise when there's a need. Now, if the government creates the need, it's artificial. If the government says, we're going to raise the minimum wage, you're going to have to pay it, now the companies decide they're going to have to invest in technological innovations to get more efficient, so they either don't have to pay the workers or they can do with fewer workers. Now, all resources in society are finite. It's nice to think you can pay everybody a minimum wage that's higher, or you can hand out guaranteed employment, not guaranteed income for everybody, but there is a limit to society's resources, and the more you give stuff to one, you're basically taking it from another. So there's an unintended consequence. It isn't just a consequence-less action where you decide to give people more money and everything works out because now they have more money, they spend more money, and everybody's happy. That's not the way it works, because employers are not happy because they have to pay more. That means they have to charge their customers more, which means their customers aren't happy, which means they may have to fire workers. So you see, there's no simple solution. And the employers will always try to lower their cost. That's their job. In order to make a profit, they want to minimize cost, maximize sales and profits. That's what they're going to do. So when the government throws this roadblock in their way, they're going to expend resources they otherwise would not expend. They're going to have to find out ways how they can automate the process, ways in which technology resources might not have been spent. And the problem with this is there is a limited pool of skilled technological workers. So whatever these technology workers start working on ways to eliminate lower level tasks, they're not working on things that actually make the world a better place. They're actually just working to stand still. The technology resources that are diverted to avoiding having to pay the minimum wage by creating low-level automation, those resources are now not working to make the world a better, safer, healthier, cheaper, more durable, product. They're just there to keep the status quo. So now what you have is you have a larger pool of unemployed, unskilled workers who, as a result of the higher minimum wage, are out of a job, and they're permanently out of that job because the technology has made it such that now that they've created this technological solution, there's no need for that job anywhere. And as the technology develops, first the larger companies can afford it, but then companies will invest money in these technologies like these kiosks that you see here. And basically, there's then no need for a entry-level worker to take your order especially at a fast food restaurant. A company can invest in these machines if they work properly, and there's no need to hire the minimum wage employers. However, these machines are really they're not making the world a better place. In fact, one could argue these machines make your experience at the fast food restaurant worse. You don't get to talk to somebody, you eliminate the human interaction, and it was working just fine before the minimum wage forced companies to move towards a kiosk program. So all this intellectual capital is spent solely not to make things better, but just to keep things the same. And in fact, ends up harming an entire industry. Now, one could argue that employers are always going to do this. The government was just an excuse for them to have done this. That's true, perhaps, but they might not have done it at this point. What the government does by forcing a minimum wage law is they accelerate the diversion of technological resources into solutions that the company probably, if it was happy paying the market-driven wage at the time and it was profitable, there probably wasn't an incentive for the employer to look for this type of technological solution. Also, companies that serve other companies that make these types of machines, they're not going to invest in helping in creating this type of machine to sell to other companies if the other companies are perfectly fine working with the employees that they have, paying them the rate that they're comfortable with and that they're profitable in paying. So you have this unintended consequence of the government intervention in the labor market. Now, the government has fine intentions. What they want, besides votes, is presumably they want to do something good. They want people to have more money. They want to make sure that people who work can find value in the work and they can pay their bills. But when they see that they can't, they think, oh, we'll help them out a bit. We'll help them out by not by giving them money, but by making the employer give them more money. So when the government thrusts themselves officiously into markets, they create a market imbalance that requires the employer to spend additional resources to counteract it. And those resources, unfortunately, that they use are the scarce technology resources, because we don't have an unlimited number of people with technological skills that can work on these types of projects. So the government intervention adds an unnecessary cost of doing business, and it often doesn't end up helping those that it purports to help. So the minimum wage laws force companies to divert resources away from their most important goal of business, serving their customers and giving them better products and services at fair and perhaps even lower prices. But again, the minimum wage law forces the business to divert its attention and resources to lowering the cost of producing the same item or the same product, just to maintain the same cost structure. So you can see what's happening here. The minimum wage law is forcing the employer to spend money to stay where they are, and in the process diverting scarce technological resources away from places where they probably would do the overall society better good. So in the best case scenario, there's no net gain to the economy or society in this scenario that we've just analyzed. Indeed, there's a net loss of workers. They lose their jobs, and the government then has to pay them unemployment benefits. And then the technology resources and workers were deployed to maintain the status quo, to make these machines such that the company can keep their price structure exactly the way it is. And by definition, those technology resources weren't used elsewhere where they could have been deployed for better purposes. So the resources and efforts expended to keep the companies in business or to maintain their status quo could have been better spent improving those companies or deployed elsewhere at other companies. So instead, the government interposes itself, forces a minimum wage onto the employer, and you get all this economic activity and resources expended and money expended and technology resources expended just to keep everything the same, and you still have a net loss of workers. And you, in some, arguably, you have a worse customer experience for the company because now they have to go and talk to the machine or push buttons on the machine when they can talk to a nice young man or lady and ask them what they want and ask questions and perhaps be served better. So in the worst case scenario, however, some companies now may not be able to adjust to the higher wages. They may not have the money to invest in innovation to keep their costs down. Or if the innovation's already there, they may not have the money to switch out and buy the machines because they may not make that investment back for 6 to 8 months and they're running on a tight budget. They could be out of work, out of business in six to 8 months. So now what you have is you have a further unintended consequence. The larger companies can afford to play this game where they try to end run the government mandated minimum wage because they can throw resources at it and they can throw technology resources at it and innovate around it, whereas the small company can't do it. So what do you have? You then have smaller companies going out of business and larger companies staying in business and staying in automation. So you have a even greater net job loss because the smaller companies can't afford to pay either the higher minimum wage or the technology required to avoid the minimum wage. So what do you get? You get the large companies with the technological innovation, and basically you've reduced the quality of life across the board for everyone. You've lost jobs and you haven't improved the world one bit. And you've diverted those technology resources that could have been done, that could have been used elsewhere to do something better. So in short, or in closing, basically the minimum wage law sets up a problem for the employer that if it wasn't there, they wouldn't have to solve it. They wouldn't have to try to avoid it. They wouldn't expend resources. Technology resources wouldn't be pulled away from other projects. And then you say, well, wait a minute, we have to do this because what about the workers? Well, I could just argue that just because you want to help workers, maybe just mandating a higher wage isn't the way to go.